Lynda Carter as Wonder Woman in the 1970s TV adaptation. Critic Rex say a new film out in cinemas tomorrow, Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman, retells the real-life origins of Wonder Woman, the heroine who made her acclaimed big-screen debut earlier this year, 76 years after her first comic book appearance. Over 8 decades, the lasso-toting superhero has fought alien bees and a villain called the Crimson Centipede, but few of her adventures can compare to the unlikely story of William Moulton Marston, the man who created her. The inventor of an early lie detector, Marston lived a secret life with his wife, a live-in lover and a second girlfriend with a taste for bondage, and all 4 of them contributed to his famous Amazonian creation. Marston was born in Massachusetts in 1893, and in 1911 went to Harvard to study law, but he found himself bored and preferred courses in philosophy. His mercurial intellect attracted to tales of Greek ideals and grand questions of thought. That led in turn to its new and more practical cousin, psychology, and although he qualified as a lawyer, his PhD and later career would focus on this nascent field of science. The great issue of the day was women's suffrage, and Marston took to the cause. His childhood sweetheart and soon-to-be wife, Elizabeth Holloway, was a determined career woman, and their relationship was a remarkably equal one for the times. "We did our biggest fighting at around 14 so that by the time we hit college we were going pretty well as a team," said Holloway later. Their harmony was particularly impressive given that there would be at least 2 other women in their marriage. Marston achieved more as a student than he would for many years after. He frequently received grades from professors famous for their reluctance to award them, and in 1915 he bought Holloway's engagement ring with $100 he won in a screenwriting contest. Initially, his professional life centered on a determination to gain legitimacy and fame, and fortune for the blood pressure-based lie detector test he had conceived at Harvard. He hooked his subjects up to a blood pressure monitor and claimed up to 97% success in spotting deception. Blood pressure remains a key element of modern lie detectors, the efficacy of which are still debated, but Marston's test never gained the status he sought. When the U.S. entered the First World War, Marston offered his work to the government. He was commissioned a second lieutenant, and assigned to the U.S. Army School of Military Psychology. But despite impressive lab results, a young J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and the Office of Military Intelligence refused to adopt his method. In practice, his studies were unreliable. He falsely accused one black defendant of lying and blamed racial differences for his test's failure when other evidence exonerated the accused. The Incredible Shrinking Formula. William Moulton Marston, and a Wonder Woman comic from the 1970s. While treating shell-shock victims in upstate New York after the armistice, Marston met Marjorie W. Huntley, a suffragist librarian and a believer in love binding, now called bondage. When he went home, she followed for an extended visit and became, with Holloway, what she later described as a threesome. For the rest of her life, she was a regular visitor to the Marston house, with her own attic room. She would help letter and ink Wonder Woman comics in the early 40s. Huntley was not Marston's only extramarital interest. In 1926, 22-year-old Olive Byrne also became a permanent addition to his household. A student of Marston's while he taught at Tufts University, Byrne was the daughter of hunger-striking feminist Ethel Byrne. She joined Marston, Holloway, Huntley and others in a near cult of female sexual power. Notes from their group, quoted in Harvard historian Jill Lepore's The Secret History of Wonder Woman, suggested that women expose their bodies and use various legitimate methods of the love sphere to create in male submission to them. This, apparently, would one day lead to a utopia of peace and equality. In the meantime, it led to love binding. Holloway was perhaps less a believer in this glorious future and more a determined career woman. With Byrne in the house to help with the children she and Byrne each had 2 by Marston, she could focus on work. She was still working on an autobiography when she died, aged 100, in 1993. Marston had enjoyed little success in his professional life up to 1940. While still a PhD student, he had opened an engineering business and a dress company, and tried to set up a law firm. But he was indicted for federal fraud over the failure of his dress company, and his academic reputation declined. From a post at American University as a chairman of his department, he slid down the ladder an assistant professor at Tufts and hired lecturer at Columbia. Soon he was reduced to inventing spurious adaptations of his theories for the advertising industry and Hollywood. In 1929, he briefly moved to Los Angeles to advise Universal Studios on the emotional effectiveness of their films, once again measuring blood pressure to assess a story's impact. one of Wonder Woman's first appearances. In a 1942 issue of Sensation Comics, his entry into comics came in 1940 when Byrne, working as a freelance journalist, wrote an article for Family Circle, a Good Housekeeping-style publication for ladies, where she consulted this eminent psychologist, not mentioning their relationship, to assess whether comics were safe for children. Marston's robust defense of the art was welcomed by the company that would become DC, and he was brought on board an editorial advisory panel to ensure their comics' moral and educational content. But Marston had bigger ideas. He pitched a female superhero, the perfect counter to all those worried about violence in comics. His Suprema, the Wonder Woman, the first part was swiftly dropped, would conquer through love, offering counsel to bullied children and abusive husbands and looking out for women and children first. She was, Marston said, psychological propaganda for the new type of woman who, I believe, should rule the world. Yet Wonder Woman owed much to the whole family. She sprang from Holloway's classical studies and straightforward determination. She drew from Byrne's bohemian Greenwich Village revolutionaries with their talk of a new utopia, and even wore Byrne's heavy bronze bracelets. There were even traces of Huntley's love binding. The heroine frequently lost all her powers after being tied up by a man. And Marston gave her the power to see through deception, brought to life in her lasso, the girdle of Hestia that forced anyone caught in it to tell the truth. His lie detector was finally perfected. Wonder Woman through the ages. Wonder Woman was a sensation from her first appearance in All-Star Comics 8 in autumn 1941. Marston envisaged her as a super-patriotic pin-up girl, defeating a Nazi plot to deprive American children of milk, and endless villains who railed against female equality. She got her own comic in July 1942, prompting Marston to come out as her creator to bask in his success. By issue 3, the comic was selling more than 500,000 copies, and in 1944 she was nationally syndicated in a daily newspaper. The scanty costume, chains and bondage made her an often controversial character. There were frequent attempts to ban her for obscenity, but readers couldn't get enough. In 1944, Marston contracted polio and, by the end of the war, was confined to bed. With his family's help, he kept churning out stories, but was carried off by cancer in 1947. He never revealed his family structure to the outside world, with Olive Byrne described as a housekeeper to visitors and her 2 sons his adopted children. In life, he never achieved the recognition he craved, either for his lie detection work or his iconic character. But thanks to Marston and his unusual extended family, Wonder Woman grabbed hold of the public imagination and never let go. Her new big-screen incarnation is proof that his unconventional life brought enduring success.